Right.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Good evening once again, and welcome back to another interesting episode on the show Behind the Scenes and How We Dr. Ron. And today we have an interesting guest in the studio, Mr. Jonathan Ajah, and we'll just be talking about medical education because that's like one of the alternative careers, physicians, clinicians can actually get into if they want to. And a lot of persons have been asking me, so here we are today. So let's dive into the conversation. Typically, I like my guests introducing themselves, really. So I'm passing the mic to you, Jonathan, to give us a
Yeah.
brief intro about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. So I think in brief, basically, uh, in summary, I would refer to myself as an academic surgeon and medical educationist. I've also dived into my own business now. So I'm an entrepreneur, founder, and an innovator. And so I think that's basically not to give us a long-winded conversation about myself, but overall, I'd worked and practiced in about 4 countries now. So Nigeria, a little, mostly here in the UK, a little bit in Italy, and then in the US as an expert teacher, not physically, but I've taught across these countries.
Wow, that's how will I put it now? That's some experience under your belt across these countries. So, I mean, looking back now, what was the motivation for you to get into medical education?
I think the first thing is if I look out back at my time, and it starts I think probably when I was a medical student, and if you look at the people that teach you,
Yeah.
some of them I remember them more than the others, not because maybe the others were not good, but I think there's something about the way they were able to communicate knowledge that was just different,
Mm-hmm.
and that stuck with me. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. Because one of the things is, if you remember, I think it was Fela that said, "Teacher, don't teach me nonsense." And so it's just very important who's teaching you something.
Yeah.
And probably medicine, it's very important in that area. So I looked at pedagogy, and I always look at what I can improve. I like to approach things is in that way, and I like to say I don't complain about anything I can't improve. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't see problems. I see problems and I see solutions. And I think when I look at that, and I always look at how can we make things better, how can we improve things, and over time it started that way. Uh, in the long run, really. So I started to teach. So I've been teaching for a while. And when I used to work in a hospital in Kaduna, there used to be this theater. He was head of the theater perioperative nurses,
Right.
and he would joke with me that you sound like a professor. I mean, he would commend my teaching, and I used to find it funny. I used to think, okay, maybe he's just been nice.
Yeah.
Fast forward, senior lecturer now. I've taught in 5 of the best medical schools in the UK, 2 of those in Nigeria. I've taught for companies in the US and companies in Italy, and I mean the equivalent of the US associate professor in medical education. So I think he was probably correct. But I always look at how we can, just impact, deliver knowledge properly. And also the second thing that probably strike me very much in terms of teaching is
Yeah.
by a Canadian surgeon called Ronald Lett. He's heading the Canadian Network for International Surgery. And he says we need to stop teaching whereby when you teach something and the students are impressed, you've not passed knowledge. And the
Mm.
reason is you've demonstrated just how much you know it. So teaching should not be where a teacher demonstrates how much he knows it. Rather,
Yeah.
it should be where a teacher pass so much of what he or she knows, to the student. And so those are some of the most encapsulating things I have to say in terms of a medical education and my experience in it so far.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for that. Now, you mentioned academic surgeon. So, do you still see patients, or is it now full
Y-
time teaching you do?
No, I mean, I have privilege to have a honorary clinical contract,
Okay.
which would be that for a registrar in surgery. That would
Okay.
be equivalent of a senior registrar in upper GI surgery in
Okay.
in the in in the Royal London Hospital. So they
Okay.
gave me this little ID card. Okay,
Badge. Okay.
yeah. So they gave me this little badge,
Mm-hmm.
and so and I really like that, and so that gives me the opportunity to do what they call clinical education. So some
Okay.
enthusiasts prefer to say the teaching that you do within hospital setting is clinical education, but really it's in terms it's still medical education.
Oh, interesting. So, is there any really like distinct difference between clinical education and medical education?
Yes, I mean
Okay.
if you want it in the broader sense, so medical education is probably two parts or three parts. So there's undergraduate medical education, which is everything involving training someone to be a doctor.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
postgraduate medical education, which is training someone that's already a doctor. So undergraduate medical education is in the purview of universities.
Mm-hmm.
Postgraduate medical education most times is in the purview of the colleges. They set the standards. And then you have continuing medical education. So that's for someone who's already qualified, but they want to keep their skills. More now, AMI, the body that shapes medical education, is trying to move into a term called health professions education. Is a
Okay.
bit more encompassing, and so it brings so we can educate people across. So like we educate vets as well, and they also
Oh,
bring in, yes, they also bring in their pedagogic practices to see how we can look at and then nursing and pharmacy. It's a bit more encapsulating, but in the strictest sense, medical education is the education of medical students, doctors, and continuing education for doctors. But in practice, that would spread across the, healthcare tree.
wow. Oh, that's interesting. At least I've picked one interesting thing today. That's nice. Thank you for that. Now, looking at the process for getting into medical education, was there any additional certification or qualification or training? I mean, what's that step like?
Yes, I mean there's some minimum standards that people would look for. It's becoming so the era where by default you become a doctor and a teacher. I
Mhm.
think it's going away.
Yeah,
It's going away, and the reason it's going away is I personally do not like that model. And if you look at the data that does exist, that's
yeah,
probably why the learning experience of medical students and, of course, postgraduate doctors who are really learning something, and you can argue, some people argue that they are students or not, but that's a debate for another day. Because if you make someone teacher by default, what you would find is who told you they are interested in teaching anyone? And so
hmm,
much more now, there's credentialing in the UK system and most systems across the world. So when you become a doctor, most times people want to see you need to demonstrate that you are interested in teaching, but beyond that, you need to demonstrate that you understand the pedagogic practices.
yeah,
For instance, how do you deliver information? How do you ensure that learning environment is appropriate? Do you understand what's the community of learning? For instance, if you look at the community of learning in a hospital, the consultant would be at the top.
Top,
And
yeah.
then, for instance, the medical student or the nursing student or the pharmacy student is just coming in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make their bridge across the time? Now, beyond that, how do you ensure that the time they spend is mapped according to the outcome? And if you look at, there's something called Don Moss level of is used for CMEs. And so beyond just giving someone information, we need to be able to say the information they are getting, how is it impacting patient
Yeah.
and community care? Now, if
Mm.
someone, and this is something that someone needs to be trained to do. So that's one way of doing that is you could do a PG SAT in medical education, a
Okay.
PG diploma in medical education. You could, if you have the experience, you can use a portfolio route. So there's a formal route where you do some university qualification. There's a portfolio route. The portfolio route, the more popular one in the UK is the Higher Education Academy, where you can enter as associate fellow or a fellow. And then you can do a direct application. You can do an application through, for instance, a certified route.
Yeah.
So that's one way. The other way is, again, that you can do is you can go through the Academy of Medical Educators. Again, doing a similar portfolio route. I happen to have both. I'm lucky to have
Mm.
both. Yes, I'm lucky to be a fellow of the Higher Education Academy based on
Okay.
my portfolio in medical education in across Nigeria and the UK. And also, I was this year admitted as a member of the Academy of Medical Educators based on my portfolio here in the UK. So those are some of the routes that you would need. And of course, other things like demonstrating the domains of medical education. So teaching, assessment, faculty development, and of course, publication.
Interesting. Now, some people talk about going for a master's in medical education. How does that fit in?
It's good. So that would fall in the was it qualification route. But just doing a master's by itself
Yeah.
does not demonstrate teaching practice.
Ah, I
So you
see.
need to demonstrate teaching practice, meaning whoever the assessor is, he or she needs to be able to look at how do you prepare a lecture, how do you map the lecture to what the particular learner is supposed to learn. Then what's the audit process? What's the peer review process? What's the student's feedback, or what's the learner's feedback on the delivery of what you've delivered? And then what do your peer think? So they do something called peer observation of teaching. So
Okay.
let's say I'm teaching something, you would peer observe me, and I can peer observe you, and give you feedback that you
Feedback.
can reflect on. Just the way you have reflection in hospital, you
Yeah.
reflect on your teaching about
Teaching.
just how you manage time in your teaching. So,
Hmm.
for instance, when you teach, let's say you know the subject very well and you keep going over time, and that's
Yeah.
something that needs to be addressed, isn't it? Let's say you have a class where students are unusually disruptive. What are your skills in managing that?
Yeah.
So those are teaching practice. Just like when you become a surgeon, you are not assessed on just your knowledge. You actually need to operate and have logbook and things like that, and you have to
Yeah.
have another more experienced person look at it and say we think it's in line of what we expect or not.
That's interesting. So it really goes beyond just having an MSc in medical education to be able to deliver on the job as a medical educator.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, in the strictest sense, is not compulsory as of yet. Is
Okay.
additional. If you, because people would need to observe your teaching practice and see that how is it impacting the curriculum at all stages? So whether you are delivering undergraduate or postgraduate, or CMEs. For now, even though I've criticized it before, um, for postgraduate is a little bit different, because once you become consultant by default, generally you are given trainers privileges,
Okay.
which is something I think should. I mean, I'd suggested that there should be consideration that people shouldn't be trainers by default. I think the colleges think otherwise. And my suggestion was maybe we should try two models, because if you look at generally medical students, you can argue that they have more power to decide who teaches them or not.
Mm,
Postgraduate trainees, not so much.
right. Okay, that's good. Then you mentioned something about curriculum, right? As a medical educator, are you involved in curriculum development at any stage?
Yes. So it's one of the core areas. If you want to be in medical education, in fact, it's an area of expertise.
Okay,
So there are many ways it would. So I'll just illustrate the undergraduate curriculum, for instance. Sorry.
it's fine.
So in the undergraduate curriculum, usually there would be there's a body that sort of sets the heartbeat, if you like,
Okay.
and so that would be the GMC. But the
Mm,
GMC would not tell you the time to teach, how you would deliver. The GMC would tell you that, look, this is what we think the graduate outcomes would be. This is what we think is the guidelines for the facilities. This is what we expect that the students should know by the time they are going out. Now, you would need to operationalize the GMC's overarching goals and outcome. And therefore, usually, you break it down into overall learning outcomes, intended learning outcomes, and weekly
mm,
learning outcomes. And you would look at the opportunities for teaching. And so, based on that, you would expand and look at what should be covered. And then there are many ways to do it. You can um, decide what has to be known, what
yeah.
should be known, what can be ignored. And so, what's considered, for instance, mandatory and optional. So, one way that you can get further help is, for instance, if you are thinking of anatomy,
Yeah.
for instance, the Association of Anatomies, all of them have come together and say, you know what, we think this should be what should be covered in the undergraduate anatomy curriculum. So you can look at what they've done and see what can be improved. But
Yeah.
beyond that, there's something called curriculum development. So ideally, every few years, because you're an expert in the field or several experts in the field, you can look at what's come up, what can be updated, what can be taught differently from, for instance, the module review, the external examiner's report, and for instance, the feedback the students themselves are giving, and also from the performance of the students' exam. So you can, for instance, look at what is it that the students are struggling with. You can add that, because that helps you to know the differential, it helps you to differentiate between high performing and the borderline candidates,
Mm-hmm.
and
Hmm.
then all of those things, and you can develop the curriculum, and you can think of the delivery of the curriculum. We're moving a lot now towards technology enhanced delivery and things like that. So curriculum development it's a big area of medical education where people specialize.
Hmm. I mean, this sounds like a lot of work, you know. I mean, I tell people to get into an area when you're on the outside looking in, it looks like, okay, these guys, they're
No,
not really doing.
it's beyond standing and just delivering and I think the more you grow in the
Mhm.
field, actually, the less you teach. That's the interesting part. You spend more time, crafting, things like curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
helping faculties develop, reviewing curriculum for other people, looking at all of the frontiers, how things are changing and improving, and also um, and things like that, so on and so forth.
That's helpful to know. So now let's look at the your transition journey now, moving in from or moving out from clinical practice
I'm
into
really hybrid, so I don't know. I'm hybrid, so yeah.
okay.
But I mean, I'm happy to talk for anyone that wants to transition. People ask me this a lot, so maybe it's good for me to address it.
Yeah,
So
so
if you
the challenges you probably faced in quotes, trying to get into this other part of your career really.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is you need to decide whether you like to um you're someone that likes to look at improving how knowledge is delivered. I think that's the first thing uh to do. If you are, then certainly you can transition. But it's a process, it's a skill. And I
Hmm.
think most times when doctors talk to me, they say, you know what, our senior registrar, I teach that doesn't carry a lot of currency, in
That's
terms of when universities will hire you. It doesn't
yeah.
carry a lot of pedagogic weight. Why? There's not proper planning so if I go to ward round, someone asks me, tell me about blood transfusion in open hernia, for instance. It's
Yeah.
not properly planned. So it doesn't carry a lot of currency in by itself.
Hmm.
So, what carries the most currency in terms of demonstrating experience with teaching anywhere in the world is really lectures carry a lot of currency. Why? Because their preparation, the research, and delivery, you can test a range of teaching practice. You can be
Okay.
able to tell the person's expertise, how succinct they can deliver, and you can look at the student's reaction and planning. So the first thing is certainly you need to look at opportunities to prepare and deliver teaching, implement curriculum. So that's the first thing. The
Okay.
second thing is, so you need to look at, most times these opportunities exist, but I think people also need to be aware that if you're coming into something new, you must be prepared to act like you really want it.
Yeah.
Yes, so the thing is, you have to look for those opportunities, and they do exist. The second thing is you must be willing to go through whatever process exists. So let's say they are calling for OSCE examiners or people to be trained as OSCE examiners. Of course, you must be willing to go through the inconvenience. Then credentialing helps, not because by itself it solves the problem, but it tells whoever that, you know what, I'm interested in this, I'm committed to that.
Yeah.
So those are the things. So depending on where you exist, but most of the trust in the UK, I mean, all over the world. When I was in Jos, I clearly, if you wanted to attend I can list a number of professors that are happy for you to attend and see how they lecture, even though I didn't
Mm.
like to attend it. But I mean, some of the professors will say, come through, see how I deliver the lecture, come and assist with examination, come and assist with invigilation, come and assist with marking. So start formalizing those things. In Nigeria, it
Okay.
does exist. So if you mark for the university, ask the head of department, could you write me a letter that says I've marked for XYZ? Could you, whatever process exists, could you look at my skill, and tell me areas of development? And once you begin to have that's a step that you can take.
Okay. That sounds interesting. Then, in terms of credentialing, so assuming maybe there are specific bodies you probably have to register with, or maybe write exams or something. Can you throw more light on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on your field. The more credential you are in your field, it helps. So let's say you are public health physician, or that helps. But that in by itself does not translate that you are a competent medical educator.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want, you can go through the qualification route. Most people opt to do a PG SAT. So if you are late in your career, you probably want to do a PG SAT in medical education, where you understand, all of the processes without outlined, and you
Yeah.
can pick where you are interested in. If you are not late in your career, you probably want to go full range into do a master's in medical education, which generally will teach you everything
Okay.
from the core principles to medical education research.
Okay.
Uh, if you do not have the time and you think already I have enough in my portfolio, you can go through the portfolio route. And I mean, I've mentored people to get through fellowship or associate fellowship of the Higher Education Academy, which is called Advanced Higher Education now, is recognized everywhere in the world, certainly for sure in the UK, Australia, Republic of Ireland, Canada, as clearly meeting. And the other thing people miss is you can also do a master's in education
Oh,
because it's
okay.
considered the same thing. Yes, so you can do a master's in education or do a master's in teaching practice, just the regular teaching practice. Or the other portfolio route is the Academy of Medical Educators, again recognized in the UK for doctors, dentists, and veterinary surgeons.
Okay. Wow. So that's I mean, there are so many ways to get into this space, you
Yes,
know.
yes. So you have to look at where am I, in my journey, and what works for you. And if you want to do certainly medical education as a full-time career, the masters is a good route, but experience would always, I mean, employers respect experience because it tells
Mm-hmm.
them, you know and there's a lot of rules for in medical education. All of the colleges have clear rules, that, for instance, in the UK, if you need a visa to come and do that in the country, they can
Yeah.
do that. I can confirm that the Royal College of Physicians do have rules called um what educationist and senior educationist, and
Okay.
some of these, I think the roles are comparable to full-time NHS jobs.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, most of those roles are hybrid to manage their CMEs. The Royal College of Surgeons have, the Royal College of General Practitioners have. A lot of universities now have strictly rules for medical education to look at things from assessment to psychometrics to delivery to curriculum development. So it's something certainly that you can do full time. There's a lot of professorial chairs that you can have in medical education, clinical education, and simulation, and well paid. Because I
Mm.
remember I was invited to apply for a role for a medical school in Dubai. And I mean, I wasn't, and they said if I was successful, I was going to get, I think, £100,000 on tax per year.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's quite big, and because there's a drive to improving the way learners are taught.
Yeah. No, I was going to touch on that later, but since you've just mentioned it, so apparently, in as much as it sounds stressful, but it's also lucrative and fulfilling. So, I mean, reflecting on your journey so far now, I mean, what would you say like your high points, in this journey as a medical educator, or
Oh,
your most
could you say
rewarding
that
part?
again? Sorry, I think I
I said,
missed.
when you reflect back, on your journey so far as a medical educator now, what would you say like are your high points or your most rewarding points, really?
I found it in lots of things. I think the first time I got hired by the University of South Wales, then it was my mentor. Uh, it was a white guy named Dean Jenkins, and I mean, he taught me a lot. At the time I met, I mean, the first time I knew him was I'd written to BMJ, BMJ, the medical education part, and I was living in Nigeria at the time, and
Okay.
I think it was in 2015. I still have the email, and I wanted to create because I looked at trying to pass the West African exams,
Okay.
and I thought resources didn't exist. I don't know whether they do now, but when you want to pass the primaries in the West African exam, at least for surgery, you keep scavenging like all over, like you keep looking for what would apply to the exam, and none of that existed. And I thought it was both a problem and an opportunity. And then I created something I call BMJ HISA, and I pitched it to them. And they had a meeting with me, you know.
Wow.
They had a meeting, yes. So Dean and a lady named Helen, they had a meeting with me, to explore my ideas. We didn't, I mean, it didn't go forward because in terms of the marketability, the size, and things like that. But it gave me the opportunity. I learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
So fast forward, under Dean's mentorship, I created something called Pass List. I started create. So he showed me, just how to write an MCQ, how to map curriculum. So that was the first time I started going into really medical education entrepreneurship because I thought I would be rich if I made some resource. And Dean used to play with me. Yes, he used to play with me and say, because Dean Jenkins created On Exam, On Exam.
Yeah, I heard about it, though I haven't
Yes,
looked
so
at the details.
Dean, and he told me when he was my age, they created On Exam. So On Exam is the BMJ's version for past tests
Mm-hmm.
or past medicine. So I had a wonderful experience started. So that was really exciting. So when Dean moved to the University of South Wales as director of medical education,
Yeah.
they had a rule for tutor in medical education. And then I just finished my first or second year as in on the master's program for public health. And then I applied, to be a tutor on the program. I'd asked him, he didn't tell me he was sure, but he said, okay, listen, how about you apply to the people and would see what they think. To cut a long story short, the people came back and said, fine, we're going to try you and see. So they tried me. I started with writing MCQs, and a very nice guy from Wales, a guy named Freebury. I think he was PhD student at the time. He taught me how to structure MCQs and things like that. And then I started writing and reading around a lot of things about differential attainment. So 2017, 2018, and all of the works of Professor Enes Mill, and things like unconscious bias as it applies to the GP exams, and all of those things, and how students perform. And from there, I moved to join the University of Dundee. So I'd applied to the University of Dundee to teach on medical education program. So they interviewed me and said, we're going to hire you. So, but what was funny was, so there's a guy, he's retired now. I think he was senior lecturer Sean McNeil or something, and Mandy, it's very nice lady. So both of them had said, we're going to hire you. But for some reason, HR refused to give me a contract.
Wow.
So I called them for, I think, about a year. I mean, 6 months, and somehow they didn't give me. But eventually, I taught for the University of Dundee MSc Medical Education program. I
Okay.
probably was the longest lasting tutor, serving
Mm,
tutor. I taught for them for a year under a lady named, and she was my referee for the GMC, under Professor, what's her name? I would remember. Professor, let me just, yeah, so but she's the head of the postgraduate medical
yeah.
education program. So I taught under her for that time. And then I moved to the UK full time
Okay.
in 20, I mean, I had the contract in late 2020 to teach at the School of Medicine at UCLan. And I was there for about 18 months. Then I moved to Aston Medical School briefly. So at UCLan, I was module lead,
Okay.
lecturer in clinical skills. And then Aston, I was clinical teaching fellow in undergraduate medical education. Uh, and then I moved to Queen Mary to do surgical education. So, and then I'm moving, I joined the University of East London to lead the MSc in Physician Associate Study as senior lecturer and course lead. But of course, around this time, I'd done clinical practice. Of course, I'd also continued to, I gained my membership here for the
Okay.
Royal College of Surgeons. I also gained registration with the GMC and full license to practice. And I had the opportunity to also get the Royal London Hospital role. I mean, under my boss, it's Professor Bijendra Patel, an amazing medical education, world leading expert in laparoscopic surgery. He's not just him, my other boss, Mr. Rajan, and Mr. Ornstein, who is a retired surgeon. So under them, I really developed in surgical education and even surgical practice as well. In Aston, I really developed under a plastic surgeon and senior lecturer, Sami Al-Ani, and Dr. John Deliu. He's a MRCS examiner in anatomy for the Royal College of Surgeons. So it's been an amazing experience. I just keep going, man. I didn't know what else I would do. So
Apparently, it looks like you are quite busy. Now, another part I'm interested in. I mean, are there specific skill sets that someone will require in terms of, okay, I want to get into medical education? Are there specifics that I probably need to look out for? Because I know, I mean, every area of specialty usually have, some unique skill sets that people probably need to be able to excel in those areas.
I would say I'll tell you what they told me when I went to work for the Italian company. So the recruiter asked me one question, probably the most weird. And she said, if you were to explain to a 5-year-old what you do for a living as a medical teacher, what would you say? And so I think most importantly, you must think of how to deliver the most complex things using the simplest methodology. And if you find a way of doing that, that's half the work.
Okay.
That's half the work. That's half the work. So if you think of how can I, pass on what I know to someone else, using the simplest means. And interestingly, there are many things you can look at, how people do it. Teaching needs to be interesting.
Absolutely.
Yes. So teaching needs to be interesting. And one of because when I moved to UCLan, I did a few things for few things differently. I did a bit more freehand teaching
Okay.
And the reason I do a more freehand teaching is I personally realize that I'm able to, articulate concepts better. And so I moved a bit away from PowerPoint. The other thing is interactive teaching is really good. And one of the person I think that does this very well is the late Professor Ronald Snell. He's an anatomist, and he has a lot of
Yeah.
videos with what's
Snails
the
and
name of
pasta. So
the yeah, but if you and he's able to bridge the more areas of medicine you can bridge when you are teaching your subject, the more people will find it valuable. Then people that have experience would use your material for revision. The students will use it as entry, and it makes the whole learning burden easier. So it's a few of those things. If it's coming in because you've got all of the qualifications within the field, that's good for getting into clinical work.
okay.
But in terms of teaching, if you struggle with transferring your knowledge into the most easy and the most, I want to look at what this person is saying or listen to and remember, then I think you may, and of course, you need to be able to innovate. You must rethink, you must reason, think outside of the box. One of the person I've been looking at recently is a guy named, I think Manny is on TikTok. He does some very interesting science experiment. He's British. What's the
Yeah.
he talks roadman. We take copper in it and we mix it with the potassium in it and this flame in it, and it's amazing science if you look at it. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
probably invite him to do one of the science fairs. And one way to know that you teach properly is if children like it. If you can teach something and get children's attention, is a good litmus test.
Okay. Interesting. Um, so that's quite because that's another thing a lot of persons really struggle with. I mean, when you're trying to ask yourself the questions: Do I have the skill set to be able to do well in this area? So I just thought it was worth them highlighting those areas. Then, I mean, looking at if a doctor comes to you now and says, "Look, I'm trying to get into this area," what words of advice would you give that person?
I would say uh, it's good to be. It's a mixture of things, you know. People that teach medical education, in my opinion, or people that like academia, don't
Yeah.
generally reason in a straight line. Yeah, so so that's the first thing. So you would think about things in multiple ways because with each
Mm-hmm.
learner is a bit different. So that's one. It's helpful if you I mean, if it's you can your verbal delivery is good. It doesn't mean, I mean, I've seen people that have gone very far in teaching that verbal delivery is not the most excellent, but
Yeah.
some bit of verbal delivery, a bit of um, charisma in the Italian system. So when I went to teach for the Italian company, they gave me some classes in drama, and it was funny because I mean we don't do that in England. And then the professor of drama taught me something called presence energy. So in
Okay.
the Italian system, the teaching is like acting. So when in you're teaching a class or a lesson,
Yeah.
there's some presence energy, and the classroom is like your stage. And so that needs to be taken into consideration. And the crowd needs to flow with you. and things like that. And genuinely, of course, preparation. The more prepared you are, you know,
Hmm.
um, the information flow, and you have to look at what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, so there's really no hard and fast rule per se.
No, not really. There are some usual suspects, if you like. Certainly, most schools you want to prepare some sort of delivery material.
Yeah.
You want to also factor the level of learners, um, and then you want to also look at the environment which you are teaching, and that way you can think of the pacing of the teaching. So if you are teaching people that are advanced, the way you would deliver the material will be different. And then you must also try and feel, the classroom, and look at that. But there's nothing. Most importantly, it should be something that you like. I don't think you do very well if you enter into teaching by accident.
Okay. Okay. So it has to be a deliberate decision to say yes.
I think it's preferable, at least in competitive areas, because the thing is, the students, at least as far as the UK setup is concerned, the students have a lot of say in the teaching they are experiencing. And so
Hmm.
if you don't like to have 10 lectures, 10 complaints that students don't like this or don't like that or don't like that, that can be, you will get some. But yeah, you get some. But now, even if they don't give you cards, at
Hmm.
least you don't want them to give you complaints. So if it's something that you really think, but again, it's a skill that develops with time.
With time,
It's a
right?
skill that, just like everything, a skill that develops with time.
With time.
And then you look at how to manage your time, how to, and how to transfer knowledge and things like that.
So looking at the what do you call it now, global opportunities for medical educators, because you earlier mentioned, I mean, you've been to Italy, teach in the UK, I think you've had a stint in the US. So
Mhm.
is there really a global demand that much to warrant you moving, around these countries, or how did that happen?
I mean, you can move, but the thing is also you need to think about your CV. So sometimes when people send me their CV, it's a little funny to me, because you need to think about the pool, the cohort which you'll be competing with. And I think there's this error that people think that, at least now, everywhere in the world, you won't easily get a medical education role if you are just certified clinically.
Okay.
Yeah, because everyone that does the exam will get there. So that generally would not make you competitive, because the best teacher is not generally the most brilliant student by
Absolutely.
default. So that's one. So you need to say, fine, I'm a surgeon now. How do I demonstrate that I'm teaching? And there are a number of ways to make yourself more competitive. I've talked about I think the part we've not talked about much is output. So when you create all of this concept, you
Yeah.
must also think of interesting way that your teaching can be consumed. It's just like music. You need to, do a song, do an album. So one way is you need to create some sort of teaching engagement, teaching activity. So that can come in workshops, the papers you publish. So outputs or publications are key, especially if you want to go around the world, because
Whoa.
most people would not have the time to look at you. They would look at the work you've done. So the first time I got to go to the association for medical education in Europe, which happens to be the biggest medical education globally. I'd done the use of WhatsApp in teaching,
Mm.
management of patients as my master's thesis
Okay.
under a lady named, she's in Canada now, Barbara Jemick. She's a plastic surgeon. So I took that and created something called an Amy fringe. A
Mm.
fringe is a funny way to teach people something. So we took the Marvel characters, and made it a teaching point, and we presented it to Amy. And Abe, that was the first time we went to Amy. And Amy I had the opportunity to meet the president for the American College of Surgeons. I
Yeah.
met James Gardin, who did the first transplant in Scotland. It's a lot of, so that's one way. And the other thing is also, while I was in UCLan, I spoke to my line manager then, a guy named Collie Mikkel, and I had this idea about teaching cesarean section using Play-Doh. It wasn't my original idea. I'd seen a
Yeah.
surgeon teach her son various surgeries using the mother and son. So I now said we could do that. So we created a learning activity for children for the science fair. And it was so popular that the organizers kept, they sent us the comment that the kids gave, and it was amazing. So, and that also, got more invitation. Of course, publication and things like
Hmm.
peer reviewing and being editors for journals and things like that.
Yeah.
Generally, with that, I would say you would be fairly competitive. And whether you've got an American accent or a Scottish accent or a Nigerian accent, most times nobody cares once you are.
Able to deliver.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, in terms of fulfillment now, would you say you're happy, in this profession? Because that's another thing a lot of people look out
I
for.
mean, I would. I don't know. I think. My career, uh, I would say I've moved. Um, have I done everything I wanted to? I'm not sure everyone does everything.
Hmm.
I think I'm lucky. I've done a decent amount. It's
Amount, yeah.
every field has, like I'm hybrid. So every field has its strength and weaknesses. But I think most importantly, probably everywhere you go, the principles are similar. It's hard work, patience, persistence, consistency. And that way, whether it's general practice, whether it's business, whether it's, and then it feels like there's something. I think sometimes, in my opinion, people go into fields with an assumption that one field is necessarily easier than the other. Well, of
Absolutely.
course, each would have its own pressure.
Yeah.
But I think if you calibrate the field according to what you want to do more, and then of course you play to your strength, oftentimes halfway. I mean, have I grown? Yeah, decent. I'd always earned more money every time I change roles, which is a good thing. So, and I'm happy. I taught in University of Edinburgh, University of Dundee, Queen Mary University London, Aston Medical School, in Italy, US. I think it's fair enough. Fair enough. I think if I calibrate it, um, it's I've grown, but more importantly, I have to say you need to keep. At least how I approach it is I keep an open mind every time.
Yeah.
I look for what I can feel, and I look at it that way. But it's a rewarding field if for those that want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that word is very key. Rewarding field for those who are thinking or want to venture into medical education. Now looking back home, I mean, over the years you've garnered a lot of skills, expertise, experience, and all of that. Are there any plans of coming back home to use all of this to improve
They didn't
our
hire me.
welfare? Is it
They didn't hire me. So,
in the spirit of
um,
giving back to the country? You know.
I mean, I do um, things for, like, if they think there's a skill that I have that would benefit. For instance, the WHO emailed me and asked me to express an interest in a trauma committee because uh, part of my expertise is global surgery. We've talked a bit with a few people.
Hmm.
One professor in more recently in Mansag, we
Okay.
presented something called Endoman. I may not be able to talk too much about it, but we're
Yeah.
working to see how we can make endoscopy, the training of endoscopy using simulation, as cheap as possible.
Mm.
Uh, I'm lucky to have a little bit of grant here in the UK to do that.
Okay.
Someone in the Ministry of Health, quite senior, is professor and directors. They said we can talk about that. Also, is chief medical director of one of the hospitals has also said we can talk about that. But still, they didn't give me an academic role while I was in Nigeria, so I don't think that was my fault. Mm.
I mean, it's interesting to hear
And I
that.
still think they may think I'm still too young to be senior lecturer in Nigeria. So I don't know. We'll find out. It's not my email is not it's not difficult to have my email. But I mean, those are the two things we can. But I think the way we structure medical education in Nigeria, there's a lot of strength with our medical schools.
Yeah.
At
Okay.
least if you look at the products and the performance, there's a lot of things we can improve. Some of it is beyond the problem. But a few things I think can be improved with education overall in Nigeria. And one of the things is people should have access to student loan and student finance.
Mm.
Now, some people may not like that, but what it does is it makes it's an even level playing field for everyone,
For everyone. Okay.
so that whether so you take out whether my parents can pay or not, and so that would
Mm-hmm.
help, allow opportunity to spread across. um so that's that. A few of the way, if you like, in terms of access to things like journals and things,
Yeah.
um you have also need to look at whether, the funding model. Our universities need to move towards generating money. But the argument, if I when I speak to my ASU colleagues, is to whom much is not given, much cannot be
Be
expected.
expected.
And so, yeah, so, but those are two areas. The problem is if you charge the students more, that can be a problem. But you can balance that with student loans, and then the university has a bit of more revenue. And I think that would make it fair. I mean, every country that's moved forward has some form of student loan. Otherwise, you
Loan.
have a lot of young people with potentials that would never get an education because there's just nobody to pay for it,
Mm-hmm.
or someone pays for it halfway, some uncle, some auntie, or some church, and then it's not sustainable. So I think that can change. uh, how far we can get it to be operationalized is a different conversation entirely.
Entirely. The problem most times is not like we don't have the ideas. It's usually hitting the ground running and implementing those ideas or solutions. That's always been
Yeah, I mean, I
our.
think we have some of the smartest people in the world. The
Mhm.
index is there to show it. I don't think thinking is the problem of our country. Almost countries,
Yeah.
there has to be a way where the vision is translated to a mission that happens. And if you look
Yeah.
at countries that work and countries that's just the difference. But what that we can, I mean, we can even borrow people's thinking in the modern day and age. You can borrow someone's thinking. I was watching Arnold Schwarzenegger said he borrowed Tony Blair's thinking to get the environmental law set up in California.
Hmm.
So that's a Europe, America collaboration where politics is completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, the players need to allow, the team play. So if the players look at it and allow it to play, I don't thinking has never been the problem of Nigeria. Because if you go anywhere you go in the world, uh, I mean, if we're among if you say 5, 10 smartest people in the world, we're
Hmm.
somewhere, yeah,
Yeah, we
in the
definitely
mix.
somewhere. I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
But when it comes to implementation of anything, I think maybe bottom 10.
Hmm.
Yeah. And when you have smart ideas that you don't implement, it goes to someone else.
To do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct. Then, in terms of, I mean, earlier on you talked about interactive dashboards or something. So, looking at the future of medical education, what are the trends you see happening, and how do you get to keep
Uh,
up with those trends?
there's a lot of technology now, technology pushing the
Mm-hmm.
pace. There are lots of things we do now. People a lot of hybridization is it's going to increase. Um, Also, Ronald Haldane has talked about a concept called fuse, rather than hybrid, is fused. So more and more now, we are creating education that fuse clinical. So, for instance, in our program, we give the students a theater experience for live surgery, live, um, for instance, anatomy teaching and conversation. So there's a lot of tech that allows that now. And now even the operation, for instance, Metronics has made
Yeah.
it possible for you to be operating in a different part of the world,
Oh, yeah.
and for someone else who is a proctor or whatever, live to give you real 3D information because they've got Google Glass, which has been here for a while. But
Mm-hmm.
what it does is Google Glass looks at the operating field, whether it's open. If it's open, Google Glass comes in play. If it's robotic, it's even easier because then you take the video capture from the robotic screen and it goes into. So a lot of that will simulation would increase, and it's becoming more and more possible now. Or there are simulators already that mirror, like the real deal. For robotic surgery, I mean, in Queen Mary, we have the Da Vinci simulator. And so
Mm-hmm.
it is allowing people to come into the lab and start developing that high hand coordination as young as early as possible. At least one of the consultants brought his 11-year-old
Wow.
and he was convincing me that, you see, that's why the college should allow people to move from open to robotic. Of course, the college wouldn't see it that way because it's complementary, isn't it? But I mean, the point
Yeah.
he's making is certainly from medical education is saying if you look at just like anything, sport or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
simulation is allowing people to develop their skill, especially psychomotor skill, as early as
Skills.
possible.
Yeah.
And for a profession like surgery, radiology, interventional cardiology, that can be an advantage. Looking at, for instance, musicians and the way they train them. So by the time the child is 14, they
Mm-hmm.
already have, and then if they
Yeah.
really get to do robotic surgery, probably it would be an advantage. But we can't say for sure
Yeah.
how much that would translate. We would need a bit of years, but that's a lot of that is coming in. In India, at least, they are also pushing, to use technology transfer to create their own robots. That's an area I'm interested in. You've asked what I would do, so I'm looking at uh, minimal access, creating models with really parts from on the ground in Nigeria. I'm still figuring out how that would work out. But we'll see. I don't know, but I'm figuring out how that will work out. But hopefully, we can be able to bring all of the lab trainers, boxes, endoscopy, and
Mm-hmm.
then all of these other things to see, because there will be a lot more. More and more procedures are done using robots. It has some of its own drawback. It's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite resource intensive, and so you must factor that vis-a-vis, and the learning curve can be quite long. And the other thing is, if someone does robotics, over time they may de-skill in other things. So again, you have to factor that. If you say,
In.
yeah, so they may de-skill in open surgery, so you need to balance that to say, what part of the world where, and what's the extra gain. you
Mm-hmm.
know let's say robotics probably increase life by maybe a few days. It may not be, and if you look at the cost and you count, so it will vary from place to place. I
Please,
think
yeah.
really that's the moral of the story. But those simulation is becoming quite big. And I think, our own medical education in Nigeria would significantly need a lot of simulation boost, but cost is a problem. And I've talked about the model of how students get into university. um I think it's about time we strongly consider student finance, so that the ground is it's level for everyone. Of course, people go into loan to but education is an investment, and I don't think it would take you back.
Mm-hmm. That's I totally agree with you, and well, I think that's for the people who are leading to figure that out, how to give access to student loans and figure out how that will work, because we really need that to happen. Like you
Yeah.
said, I mean, a lot of people out there, because of funding, they can't get the opportunity to get a decent education.
Yeah, I
So
think maybe if you look at the research, maybe 60-70%,
yeah,
certainly more than 50%. But I'm more leaning now in my career on implement, like the creative part, so I innovate. So I'm strongly looking at saying, how we could support with the hardware, and then a bit
yeah.
of maybe software of medical simulation, across the Nigeria. But I'm not exactly sure how that would work. But we're looking to try it a little bit. Let's see how the Endoman does,
Yeah.
and see, just how it is, whether we can offer it at a cost which, uh, uh, one, create it from resources within the country, so that way it's affordable too, and then make it as durable as possible.
It's possible. Yeah.
And yes, and see how simulation can come that way. We can have a lot of our own people learning minimal access robotics. As far as I can tell, already in India, they've made, they are Indian made robots now, surgical robots, which is not really an easy feat. Because if you look at the creation of the brain of the robot and just tech, and the fine movement that the robot does,
Mm-hmm.
and the only way you can develop that is if you start creating something from the scratch. And of course, we
From
have to,
scratch.
and then we have to teach people to have that habit, rather than assume that if you start something this month, by next month you would have something big. No, it would take about 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And then that way you can have a better deal, even if you are
Mm-hmm.
collaborating with someone, because you have some of the tech already, isn't it? And so
Yeah.
even if after some years, for various reasons, the climate is not good for Siemens to continue to do the deal, you already have, people from within that did learn the skill,
I've
and
picked
that
up
just
the
keeps,
skill. Yeah.
making the economy grow, and it just many other advantages around that.
Hmm. It's just conscious of time. I mean, it's past the 1 hour mark, and I mean, I still have lots of questions, but conscious of time. It's really been an interesting session with you. So I think yes, I can now beat my hand on the chest to say yes, medical education is actually a very good area to be in, because the thing I struggle with, or a lot of persons struggle with, you hear of certain areas and you're thinking of getting in there, but you really don't have anybody to look up to. So is there anybody in this area I'm trying to get into? What's the experience? What's the journey like? A lot of people are groping in the dark, sort of. So, well, I mean, here we are today. So, yeah, testament that yes, it does exist and it is fulfilling.
Yeah. We should. I mean, we could. There are a lot we can talk about. Also, have other people. I think that
Hmm.
it's one interesting thing is always, experience is, it's really good because it give people the opportunity to, the fine details, and then
Yeah,
they can easily make a more clear
informed.
decision.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
there's it's difficult to walk from an abstract, completely abstract to reality.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if you want us to do more, um, have more conversation, no
Yeah,
problem, and then
definitely.
we
We'll,
can.
we'll find time to, because I get these questions a lot all the time. Because part of what I do is, I just talk about a lot of alternative careers that people can potentially look at. Then the
Yeah.
next question is there anybody in that field I could, look up to or talk to or have a chat to really, you know, talking to somebody who has done that part is different from just clicking on Google, reading about medical education, and it sounds all fancy. But when you get in, then you see it's a different kettle of fish entirely. You know,
Yeah, because Google is going to tell you everything is good.
exactly.
It's going to tell you. I mean, it's amazing. You just get in and get to the top. Yes, and then I think, I personally think the time for a linear or a monolithic career is probably dying, or if it's not
Hmm.
dead already. So it's important to have, as diverse a career as possible,
Yeah,
because that's probably an important negotiating factor. Yeah, that's an important negotiating, because I mean, it gives you the opportunity to have more employers, and there's nothing
exactly.
better than more suitors, isn't it? Yeah.
Which
So
translates to more money. The
yeah,
higher your
it helps you
negotiation power.
negotiate too. Yeah, it helps you negotiate, uh because sometimes, again, it varies for people, but I don't know, a lot of things that if you do over and over again, you begin to, everything starts looking the same.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
there's always a way to recharge if you have, some. So some days I'm in the hospitals in theater, and then I miss to teach, and then I'm teaching, and I miss theater, and then sometimes I'm just creating something, like we've just created, hopefully it gets accepted. We're going to do a public engagement with demystifying tummy tuck abdominoplasty using Play-Doh, and we're
Mm,
going to use real body art anatomy, and we're going to do that live. So we're going to have someone, their abdomen, describe the anatomy, map it. And I got an artist, one of my former students, a lady and a doctor from India. She can draw, and we're going to do that live. And then we're going to do an actual Play-Doh anatomy, abdominoplasty, and look at the muscle and show people how I stitch up, for a workshop.
mhm.
We proposed it to Amy. It's going to take place in Switzerland. I mean, they've not said yes, but so these are some. I mean, it can have a way of refueling
Yeah,
career and I think we should talk more. I mean, I've also tried to explain. I mean, speak to them in Unduk. I shouldn't be saying this live, but I think there are a lot of things they can come and talk about on your show.
right.
Yeah, from some of the things we disagree on the platform, we can have a respectful debate, and we can have a
Conversation.
respectful, educating conversation. A couple people with varying ideas,
Yeah.
from everything around living overseas to the ones that want to talk about relationship, money, and people can, we should. So hopefully, I'm saying this for them. Hopefully, they come
Hope they
through.
are watching too. All right. I'll drop your. Let me see if it's there. So for those watching, you guys can reach him on his email. This is it on the screen, and I'll drop a link to the description where you can, book for a one-on-one session with him. To maybe you're looking for more clarity. You probably have questions that we might not have covered. So I'm going to drop that link in the description. Then you can have that one-on-one session with him, and hopefully we'll still have more of these conversations. Really, I mean, there's a lot to talk about for people to understand about different things. Really, about across different careers. Really. So that's it for me. Any final word from you, Doc?
I mean, I just say stay inspired. I like to say when I wake up in the morning, I probably believe in three things. I believe in God, I believe in myself, and I believe in the process. And I get back to work. That's just what I do. Um, and it works. You have to believe in God, because there are things that are certainly, I mean, if you believe in God, but if you do, or you believe in a higher power or whatever, but I believe in God. And so I believe in God because there are things that are outside your control. You need to believe in yourself because it's the cheapest form of
Yeah,
validation. Yeah, it's the
exactly.
cheapest form of validation. So if you're looking for external validation, what is important is it takes a long time for external people to be willing, or bodies to be willing to validate you.
Mhm.
And then you need to believe in the process, and then look at what you are doing, see what you can improve. It takes a long time to be successful in anything. It takes a long time. So that, of course, patience and persistence. And also take feedback both from yourself and from others, and then see how you can improve. And then, of course, reach out and speak out. Be proactive. Being proactive helps a lot if you keep asking. Interestingly, not a lot of people have said no to me, and I've actually emailed some of the most successful people medically, even while I was living in Nigeria. A lot
Engineering,
of
yeah.
them have not said no, but of course, um, if you are looking for something, being proactive, ask, reach out. The worst the person can say is they would ignore the email or say no.
No,
And then, of
yeah.
course, that helps you to say, I move to the next person, or it
Next
gives
person.
good feedback. You go back and look at your process and say, okay, what from this feedback? And sooner or later, it begins to just, tie. And I mean, I interviewed for senior lecturer role 3 times. The fourth time, I
Wow.
had a feeling that I would be hired. yeah, the fourth time I had a feeling like that I would be hired. And the reason was I looked at what I think I didn't do well.
The
The
previous
first
one.
time I didn't think I dealt with the leadership question properly. So when we got to this leadership, I said this interview has problem. In my mind, I knew that this interview had problems. And then so the last time I was like, how do I take the bar of my candidature? And what happens is really when you gain experience, how do I take the bar of my candidature that I think anyone coming to interview for that role, whatever they bring, is either they are at par with me or they are below me, at
Mm-hmm.
least in my mindset. And I looked at all the skill set I had, the time I was given, and the way I delivered it.
Yeah,
And I think I was very close to my plan, or if not above, because it's training too. I think some
yeah,
people don't understand. If you don't apply enough, it's training.
it's
If you don't
training. Yeah.
attend enough interview, it's training. If you don't do a lot of mocks, you are not getting the training you need. So these are
Mm-hmm.
the things. So some people have this because you have to be at a particular level before they pre-agree contract with you.
Yeah.
You need to be like a Nobel Prize winner or something that they come keep you in the room and say, Ronald, if we offer you this role, because sometimes people speak to me, it's just funny. No, you have to be like the Nobel Prize winner or someone they know that just when they hear that you've come to the university, about
Yeah.
2,000 students will just transfer and join you. They say, if we offer you this role, will you accept? You get
Mm-hmm.
me? And
Yeah.
then, but otherwise, you need training. You need to keep, that's, I think the best way to prove yourself is to have something out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has to have something. You may keep saying, what do I have out there that is showing? And the interesting thing is when you have really, you've worked with a lot of people and they scrutinize your paper or your workshop, they'll milk the huh? When they squeeze, the one we present in Mansag, they made me review it like 3 times, and I was awake like 1 a.m. like 3 days in a row. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in fact, before I started presenting it, every other person has presented. Nobody was standing. Everyone was standing and was watching me. So it just goes to show how other people's voice can really raise the bar of
Yeah.
whatever you've created.
Hmm. That's interesting, really. So it's been an amazing conversation. Like I said, we'll still have more of these, conversations, really, because people are looking for insights, people are looking for clarity, people are looking for direction, people are looking for guidance, really. And it's for those who have gone ahead of the game to actually, provide those little resources of help, if I can call it that way. So thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll be back next week again with another episode. And thank you, Doc, for sharing some of your time. I know it's very expensive
No, no
to pay
problem.
people
No problem.
in this
My
UK, but
pleasure.
we don't have money to pay you guys.
No problem. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you.